my name is Tara Bentley, and I'm the Executive Director for the Indiana Association of Home Educators, otherwise known as the IAHE.
And my name is Courtney Nalen. I am a homeschooling mom of two who also works full-time outside of my home and a volunteer with the IAHE.
Together, we're your co-hosts for Season 2 of the Homeschool Indiana podcast. We'll be here each week sharing information to help you homeschool, keep you updated on what you need to know, and have some fun along the way. So let's get started. Hi, everyone. Tara Bentley here, and we are jumping in mid-January with a special episode of the Homeschool Indiana podcast. We are turning out this episode really quickly. We were prepared to come back for the second part of Season 2, but we're going to come out here in the middle to discuss an important bill that was filed and dropped yesterday afternoon, Senate Bill 483, with the title of Regulation of Homeschooling. And so my special guest today, you've heard her on the podcast before, is Kylene Varner, our legislative liaison. Hi, Kylene.
Hi, Tara.
It's so good to be with you. You and I have been talking pretty much all day. Well, we've been talking for a couple months now, actually, about this potential piece of legislation. We knew that a bill was coming. We did not know specifically this bill with this tone and title was coming, but we did have a heads up. So we had a meeting with the Department of Education. It was supposed to be in early December. It got pushed back a little bit, but we knew that the topic that was going to be addressed here is the chronic absenteeism and truancy in public schools. And so again, we knew something was coming. We were warned. But when the bill showed up, as I saw last night around 10 p.m., I think I was messaging, like, don't check your phone at 10 p.m. That's a lesson.
It was pretty late. Yes. Yeah, but it is also policy season. And so this is the season to not have do not disturb on your phone.
This is true. And so as our team does, like, jump out of bed, like,
We literally did.
Review all the things. And so the language in the bill definitely has a tone that is concerning. And I will say, we want to be really clear, and we're going to say this start to finish. We're not here to be fear-mongering. As it sits, this bill, we're going to tell you what you need to know, what it is, what it isn't, what it means potentially for the future and down the road. We're not here to do fear-mongering.
Absolutely.
We know that this is a bill that we cannot stand. We do not like. We don't think it's going to fix the problem it's supposed to fix, period. But we're going to break it down. So stick with us. Make sure you listen all the way to the end. We're also going to give you a call to action at the end. So right now, this bill was filed yesterday. It's up on the IGA's website, and we will link it here. We're also going to have a blog post that will have more information for you guys to check it out. But why don't we just start, Kylene, with you explaining a little bit about what the bill says and a little bit of the bill analysis, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. So SB 488 is specifically a bill geared towards chronically absentee high schoolers whose families withdraw them to homeschool. Now, we want to be super clear. This applies to a very small population of people who are withdrawing their children to homeschool. So let's quickly break down the bill, what it defines, what it is, and what it isn't. So this bill officially defines homeschooling as educating the student at a non-accredited, non-public school that has less than one employee, in which the parent of the student provides the student with instruction equivalent to that given in the public school. I'd like to pause here really quickly because there's two important things. One is that we see homeschooling officially named and codified in the statutes. It's really important to remember that Indiana was the first state to codify homeschooling in a state v. Peterman, and that was in 1904. So Indiana is on the forefront of educational freedom here in the nation and defending parental rights. It also comes and says that now only parents are permitted to homeschool. It says nothing about grandma, grandpa, auntie, neighbor. So never before have we had it codified who can and cannot homeschool a child here in the state. We've recognized that in some cases, it takes a village to educate kids. It takes extended family, and that right would be stripped away from a family with this current language. So what it also does is it starts to redefine a chronic absentee child. So for a long, long time now, Indiana has already had statutes that codify if you miss 10 or more days, you're defined as the state as a habitual truant. And then also that habitual truancy means that the prosecutor is going to be knocking on your door, DCS is going to show up. This is actually a Class B misdemeanor if a parent is found in violation of educational neglect. It currently carries 180 days in jail for each offense, and then $1,000, up to $1,000 fine for each offense. So this is up to 180 days in jail and up to $1,000 fine for each offense. These are already things that are codified. In this last legislative session, we saw a lot come out. So 2024, we saw a lot come out on chronic absenteeism. It was codified again that a habitual truant is defined as 10 days or more out of school, that at day 8, schools are required to meet with the family, generate a SMART plan to prevent current and ongoing absenteeism. And then if this happens, they're going to send DCS out to you. And then also the county prosecutor is going to, again, come and prosecute you. These are already things that are in law. All right. They recodified them. This is an attempt to do that again. So now what they're saying is this applies to a child who is currently enrolled in a public school. It does not say if this is a school corporation, a charter school, a virtual public school, a state accredited school. So there's no definition of that here. It says that the child has missed at least 10% of the days in the school year, both excused and unexcused. So of course, we have some thoughts here about this. What about the kid who is medically complex? What about the kids who are in extracurricular, I try saying that word 5 times fast, curriculars, right? Such as think like a travel ball team, think Bible Bowl, anything that takes you away from education is an absence, right, at the public school system. So they're saying both excused and unexcused. That's interesting. So 10 or more days, if we look at 180 days, that's 18 days of absences. That child has already hit the definition of a habitually truant student by the state standard of 10 days. That's already codified. All right. So what's going to happen is if you have a child who has missed this 10% of time and the parent, this is again a high school student, we know that based on the location of where they want to insert this language, want to be specific, it is a high school student. What they're going to do is they're going to put what they're calling the school of origin or the public school. This means the school that your child was last enrolled in charge of overseeing your homeschool plan. So what's going to happen is the parent will be required, this is a shall, not a may, the parent shall present what is termed in the legislation as a thorough plan, insert air quotes. There's no definition of what thorough plan means. Who defines that? We all know that homeschooling looks significantly different than what goes on in a public school. We know that in education, if administrators, if teachers get any schooling at all on what homeschooling is, it's like this short little 20 to 40 minute blurb, and then they move on with their life because that is not their concentration in their career program, right? So we're looking at giving now our public educators the opportunity to see what is and what is not education. This comes down to Masnick v. St. Pierre, and this is where we get in the code that public schools don't get to decide what goes on in the home. This is already case law. It's very important case law. This is why we keep those cases and we don't forget them. It's so important. So in doing this thorough plan, the parent has to present what curriculum and courses the child will complete during their time homeschooling. The parent has to meet with the superintendent of that school of origin no less than 2 times each semester for the first full school year that the child is homeschooled, and they have to give a progress report. All right. So you're looking at the parent being under the public instruction for 1 year at least, meeting with the superintendent 4 times in that first year. They have to give a progress report. Well, let's talk about the definition of the progress report. So the parent has to provide a portfolio, which is evidence of the schoolwork that's been completed, and they have to provide learning progress. That's going to come down to standardized testing. That's all that is. So now the parent is going to have to present what whomever is defined as learning progress. After that first year, they have to continue to meet with the superintendent of that school of origin no less than 2 times every year that they continue to homeschool. They must also continue to provide that progress report. That means that this parent will never educate independently of the government. That's what this means. If a parent does not do these things, or the superintendent of the school of origin determines that the child is not making progress, again, who defines progress? How is it measured? With what tools? The child will then, only then, be reported as a habitual truant. Remember, they already met this definition. Remember, the definition is 10 days. 10 days. This piece of legislation says 10%. All right. And the prosecutor is going to be notified. Why did I say notified? That's silly. So they're going to be notified. Now, let's just go back. It was already codified that this is what was supposed to happen. It's already been codified in that way. It's already in the statutes. All right. So here we are. We're in this situation where we say, okay, this is really a 3-part failure for this kind of legislation to even come about. Again, I want to be super clear. This is a very, very small percentage of people, parents, withdrawing their children to homeschool that this would impact right now. However, we all know that this is literally the slope. This is the entry point. Once we define homeschooling, we've been told for years, don't get in the book, right? The book of the public school codes and the private school codes, anything that's publicly funded. We've been told repeatedly, stay out of the book. This puts us in the book. We're now on the radar. There's no question about that.
So let's say, number one, it is Senate Bill 483.
I'm sorry, did I say it wrong?
That's fine. Right. Hey, you've done the analysis, right? I can
so
get the number right. That is totally fine.
It's 483. I'm looking at it right here. What is wrong with me? I apologize.
No, but so one of the things that, I want to highlight of everything that you have said. So one of the things that homeschoolers, if you're new, or maybe if you've been homeschooling for a really long time, pretty much everyone knows we're non-public, non-accredited. I want to highlight again that addition of the language with less than one employee, because this is not a little part of code that anyone paid attention to in the old days. 10 years ago, no one was paying attention to the separation between homeschoolers and private schools, Christian schools, right? But that little addition of language, and there's a reason it's in here, because the reason it's in here is to point the finger directly at us. And sadly so, because this is not about us. This is a diversionary tactic of a bill. The title of the bill alone, because this isn't about homeschoolers.
Right. The title, Regulation of Homeschool, right? That's what the title is.
Horrible.
Yeah.
And which makes it sound worse than it really is. Like, that's the truth of it. But it opens a door. It could open a door wide open. And whether or not the bill moves forward, like, we need to talk about that, because whether or not the bill moves forward, the damage is done.
Absolutely.
The damage is done. It is out there. And our response is that you should never use a broad stroke brush to paint over an entire community, because there are some bad actors out there. The laws already exist. And they need to be implemented. We have never been in favor of homeschooling being used fraudulently by families or by anyone else. If a family has run into issues with their public school, they need to deal with that before they decide to homeschool.
Absolutely.
We've always been clear about that.
Right. And I want to be really clear that even in all of our social media groups, when somebody comes in and they say, oh my goodness, I just can't get little Timmy out of bed. We had this one actually come into one of our groups recently. My child just doesn't want to go to school. Can I withdraw them to homeschool? The state has said that I'm in danger of habitual truancy. And our automatic response is, we cannot suggest at this time that you withdraw to homeschool. You're coming to homeschool your high schooler, and this child was a high schooler. It does not erase the bad grades, the credit deficiency, the absenteeism. It doesn't erase that. If you're already on the school and the state's radar, Houston, you need to stick that out and deal with that problem and not bring it elsewhere. It doesn't change anything.
And so our response is, we live in a country that believes innocent until proven guilty. And we do not want to see laws that have these broad ramifications and potential for ramifications, because things already exist. As you've said,
Absolutely.
Things already exist. CPS is already there. And we're not going to talk about the success or failure of CPS because we'd be here for a whole nother episode. And that's the truth. We're not going to say that CPS can handle everything that they have in front of them.
Right.
But to say that you're going to shift the burden from a system of following an at-risk child, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about an at-risk family that should be followed up with. If the school knows, then there should be a holistic approach to identifying the problem, behavior issues, grade issues, credit deficiencies. There should be other indicators than attendance. This is a one trigger bill.
Yeah.
And granted, it's a pretty big one. But to tie it to the word homeschooling is something that we cannot sit silent about.
Right. Well, and I think it's really important too. You say that, so we talk about like the failures. Yeah, there are multiple points, like checkpoints, as we would refer to them, that these children should have been caught up in, right? Bad grades, credit deficient, absenteeism. These are families that are already on the school's radar. They're already on DCS's radar. And so when we're in this situation, who's interceding for these families, right? Who is saying, hey, little Timmy, notice that you weren't at school yesterday. What's going on with your life, right? And there are sometimes, I would say that there is a small percentage of time where little Timmy is doing great, right? Good grades, good attendance, on track with credits and all the things. And to say suddenly that little Timmy, his attendance is bad, right? His grades are suddenly bad. What's happening? What's going on with that student? There's been a life event. And what are we doing? In the care and keeping of the kids in our tutelage? What are we doing with that? Are we relationally, right? Not just like the number crunching, the data, the demographics. What relationally are we doing to connect with that student and that family?
And let's add one other puzzle piece here, because we live in a state where we are all mandatory reporters.
Yes.
So I think every family needs to know that there are multiple things in place. And so to say that the word homeschool can be used to erase all other indicators is not true. And to move the target onto the homeschool community in this way, to deflect, that's really what it is. And if there is a situation with a family, the school, the community, like they should be letting someone know there are already systems in place. And let's fix that. Like if we're not saying that we live in a perfect world, we're not saying that bad things don't happen. They do happen. And as Christians, as citizens, we should always weep with those who mourn. We should always reach out to those families where we see that there are issues. We should come alongside them. But to set up an entire new system, shift the burden to avoid the benchmarks that are already in law will not solve this.
Right. And I think that's really important too, because, when we look at like all these other systems, adding one new doesn't change anything. It doesn't mean that it's suddenly going to rectify what's happening with the other systems that are already at play. But also homeschooling, we're the lowest hanging fruit. We're the easiest thing for them to go after because they know that by and large, Indiana homeschoolers, we follow what we're told to do.
Right.
They know that. So, we talk about like these other systems, but homeschooling is the easiest low hanging fruit for them to come after. And, you and I talked about this a little bit. How many school systems have the staffing to handle this kind of thing? They're going to have to, it's not just the super, right? The super is not going to be able to handle this because superintendents are oftentimes dealing with multiple schools within the same corporation.
Right.
They don't have time for this.
Right. It's a placebo. This is a placebo to kind of fix a problem that it's not going to fix. And, to look backwards, I want to make it clear, this is not new. This is, a lot of people, we put a little shout out in one of our Facebook groups that said, we're looking at this bill. We're going to update you later today. That's why we've jumped on here because we realized it's more complex and it really needed a fuller conversation. And people said, well, it's the COVID schoolers. It's the COVID schoolers. They're creating this drama. Well, yes and no. Like, yes and no. So I have been with the organization since 2012, and this has been a conversation every couple of years, no matter what, that school truancy, absenteeism, dropouts, that one of the easiest solutions is for legislators, the media, the school to misidentify the problem. This is a truancy problem. This is an absentee problem. In 2013, the law was changed, and we worked with the education committee at the time to add the high school withdrawal form. And we worked with them on that to keep that as simple as possible, but that went into law in 2013. So if you withdraw a high school student, you have to fill out that form. But we continued to see it. And we're going to have a blog post again that goes back, 2016, we had issues. 2017, we had issues with the public school push out. And we had homeschoolers as dropouts, where Chalkbeat ran a big piece. And we had talked to them about that, worked with them on that. Hidden dropouts has always been an issue. And then we had in 2021, I think it was, when families decided they didn't like a lot of the mask mandates. They didn't like what was happening. So there was a push to pull your kids out for 1 week and claim your homeschooling. Like, all of these things, big and small, is misuse of our freedom, misuse of our statute as homeschoolers. And so we don't ever want to allow these things to gain traction. And that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it.
Absolutely. And so there were a few things about this language that I want to point to just super quick, so that when people are like, oh my goodness, the bill still says this thing, I'm with you. I hear you on that. But there are a few things within the bill that make us go, okay, the intention of this is to open dialogue and to start to get to the root of some of the issues. So first and foremost, we don't see where the definition of a homeschooler would be placed into code. Every time we have new definitions come up, there has to be a section that it's placed into. So we see that come out. We see the word homeschool appear multiple times before the definition is actually given. So when we look through this and we see the parent is defined, I can't imagine that we would go for a definition like this, that our state leaders would, and also restrict the freedom at the same time. What they're really doing is pointing to the guardian and saying whoever was in charge of the child's education while they were at the public school, that's really what they're getting at here. So I just want to say all that to say there are indications that this bill will not move forward. But let's talk about what happens when legislation like this is submitted, it's filed, it's brought to the forefront. What's going to happen with that stuff?
Well, the image that comes to my mind is waving a red flag right in front of a bull. That's what I see, right? This may not go anywhere. It may not, and maybe that's the intention and the way that it's written. Again, we had meetings, so we knew, but it's still about raising a flag up the flagpole to see what happens. It really does. It puts the target on us, whether or not the bill moves forward, with the media and many others.
Yes. Well, and I think too, there are some organizations who look at the very worst of abuse and neglect. And again, you've said it, we're going to state it again, that the IAHE, we are strongly against any parent mistreating their children. That will never be stood for. That is not a matter of homeschooling. That is a matter of already criminal conduct, which is abuse and neglect. That's what that is. But there are organizations who equate bad cases to literally every homeschooler. And they say that every homeschooled child is at risk of educational neglect. And groups like that will get the ear or not of lawmakers, and they will bring forth these horrendous cases. And then we see legislation comes out that impacts a very small group of people, but it impacts all of us who are innocent of said criminal activity.
So I want to take just a second to timestamp this. And I don't normally do that with all of our podcasts, but it really matters here because you may not listen to this today, tomorrow. But this bill dropped yesterday, which was January 13th, 2025. We're recording it on the 14th. And we're going to push it out as quick as possible, but you may not hear it for a little while. And so it's very important to pay attention because you're going to be surprised that we're not going to ask you for some massive call to action at the end, because we knew and we know that this is not really aimed at us, but we also believe that it may or may not move forward. And so we're being careful to not do fear mongering 100%. So when you hear this, you may want to go, okay, what was the status of that bill? Maybe I need to go look that back up. Check the links, because we will keep the website updated. Podcasts have a way of living longer. So obviously, get the current status once you actually hear this and pay attention where it was. But if it's not this bill, it could be another one.
You bet.
So
and again, this bill is SB 483.
Good job.
That's what this, yay me. That is what this bill is. Sorry, I've read about 100 pieces of legislation since Saturday.
That is totally fine. I'm going to pause for a second and I'm going to ask you one question.
Yes, ma'am.
You had mentioned that this bill is only for high school students.
Yes, ma'am.
I did not see that.
So the way that we know that is where this language is inserted into. It is specifically for high school students only. So when we look at code, we always look at the sections and the articles and the chapters that it's being inserted into. So this one is going into IC 2033-2. And that specifically is dealing with compulsory attendance. And then later on in the bill, it goes into say that is defined into section 28 there. So it's saying permitted under section 28 of this chapter. And that section in particular defines what has to happen when a student withdraws to a non-accredited, non-public school located here in Indiana for high schoolers only. So 28 is for high schoolers only. All right. So go ahead.
No, that's very helpful, because number one, this highlights why you always need a team, because you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you in many ways. And then you try to be smarter in other ways. And that's why you need a team, right? So that's great. So what that also means, and I'm just going to go back to something I said earlier, is that this is a one trigger bill.
Yeah.
And especially in high school, it doesn't need to be, because as we said, are they credit deficient? In high school, like there are other indicators that would say this is an at-risk child.
Yeah.
And, and maybe it's just to simplify things. And I agree, like 18 days, why? Someone should be asking why. But there are
I think we
other
should be
things.
asking why, 4 days. Like if little Timmy is out unexcused for 4 days and nobody's heard anything, why? Right. When they're at a public school, they're students belonging to the state. The state is responsible for their education. And I say this, the state is responsible for the care and keeping of the children in its tutelage. At home, we are responsible for the care and keeping of the children in our tutelage. So what's happening here? And I think the fact that, those kind of checkpoints that we talked about, like the grades, right? The credit deficiencies, the absences, those aren't in here. And that's another indication to me that this bill will not move forward this session. And to come back, we get, again, this is high school students, but I want to be super clear. It might be high school students this year. Next year, it will become all students.
Right.
That's how easy it is.
Exactly. So,
and that's not fear mongering. That's just the reality of what happens.
No, and it is one of the reasons why we say we have to remain vigilant. We say it over and over and over again. And it gets, I know, if you're in the trenches, it gets a little old to hear it over and over again, because we live in one of the freest states. So you want to accept that and move forward peacefully. But it is something we have to watch for. If you're seeing this and, if you're on IHE's email list, you know that we did a webinar last week on homeschool freedom, what you need to know for 2025. And I know not everyone could attend, and I know we had technical difficulties, but the bottom line is we have critics that are out there pushing model legislation that includes pieces like this, that they want to reduce the ease of what it takes to homeschool. And this is a win for critics. And we're not saying, again, I want to reiterate, we don't think that homeschooling erases everything. It doesn't.
Nor should it.
No, it does not stop CPS from following up with a family. It never should. We just want to not get innocent families caught up by bad legislation.
Absolutely. by a few bad actors, by the way.
Mhm.
By a few bad actors. And I want to highlight that this kind of information is, first of all, absenteeism is nothing new. Especially since COVID, there's been a push across the nation to get kids back into school because for whatever reason, they're experiencing anxiety, bad behavior in school from their peers or whatever that looks like. I hate the word bullying. It just feels so juvenile. And I know we are talking about kids here, but let's talk about when you're verbally abusing somebody or physically abusing them. You can't stand for maltreatment. Really, that's what this is at the end of the day. And so last year, we saw a ton of bills being pushed out about absenteeism. This is no different. The state is trying to figure it out. They really are. I say good for them. They're trying to figure it out, but don't take us down in a flaming ball of glory while you're attempting to do that. So, it's not a new push. It is an issue that the state is attempting to solve. And I can appreciate that, just not in this form.
Right. And one of the things that we shared with other policymakers in that meeting is that what we know is that many families hang in as long as possible with the public school system. They want the public school system to work. They don't want to homeschool, and they very often find themselves homeschooling as a last resort. And guess what? We're here for those families just as much as those who decide they want to start homeschooling when they're in preschool. Many people do come to home education as a last resort, and they very often have a lot of absenteeism because illness with their child, stress. We hear over and over and over again news stories about the levels of stress and anxiety in all students. It is definitely on the increase. And so families are not going to walk out of public education easily. They very often feel pushed or pulled into it. They're not going to have a plan. Right. They're just not going to have a plan. It could take them weeks to get a plan. And what does that look like? We don't know yet. So
it's another hindrance, right? It's another hindrance. This whole well thought out, thorough plan. It's another hindrance. It makes me think about a situation that was just presented to us yesterday about a family with a young child who, for the last 2 years in their local public school, had been physically assaulted by certain classmates. And the parents had gone to the school, said, guys, here's what's happening. We're requesting that you not set the children next to each other, XYZ. Those things were not honored. And the child, in its own self-defense, because it was being physically assaulted, took another child down to the ground that was hurting them. And the child who was the one being injured, that child was the one that was disciplined. And the parents are at the point where they said, we've done this for 2 years.
Wow. Yeah.
2 years we've done this and we're done. We want to take our kid out to homeschool. This is the kind of situation that we're talking about. These are parents who, in many cases, they don't feel like they have any other options.
Right. So we don't want to go on too much longer because we're preaching to the choir, talking with each other, right? And we could we could go on. The bottom line for me, the summary is that this bill will not fix the problem that it is attempting to address. It shifts the burden from CPS to local superintendents, and it paints a target on us as the homeschool community. And so before I give our final call to action, quick summary from you, Kylene, anything else?
No, I think we've said all that needs to be said. I really do.
Yeah. So again, whenever you listen to this, get updated, go to the website. We'll put the link in the show notes. That is important that you know the current status of the bill.
Yeah.
Again, we're not here fear mongering, and you'll know that in a minute when I give you our call to action. But you have to know this is coming. And again, if not this bill, if not this session, it will come again. So our call to action basically is we have 4 main points for you, and I hope that you will take note and share this. Number 1 call to action is pray. Like there can be no other first point. Pray for our community. Pray for the attacks on our community. Pray for wisdom for our legislators who are caught in the middle often between many different voices that they can hear what needs to be heard. Second is to build relationships with your own legislators. We have many ways for you to do that. We have a Guardians program with IAHE Action. You can just get to know them at your local events as well, whatever that looks like. Like we're just going to keep that one pretty simple. build relationships.
But also, so let's say that you don't know how to find your legislator. I get this question a lot, like, Kylene, how do I find my legislators? Well, I just want you to go to iga.in.gov, click on Find My Legislators, and you'll be able to enter your address. This is super important because the person that your neighbor might have as their legislator may not be yours, just simply based on how lines fall. So it's really important to go find out who your state legislators are, both your rep and your senator.
And then number 3, be vigilant and pay attention. The push for registration regulations is growing. And this push is not only at the state house, and that needs to be said. This is in the media. This is in college campuses, academics writing horrible papers saying evil things about us. So you have to be vigilant. You have to pay attention. And if you can't pay attention to all the things, support those who are in the work and in the fight. Okay. And one of the easiest ways for you to do that, and this is our call to action number 4, it is more important than ever that you stand with us and you come and attend Capitol Day, which is 1 week away. So
it is 1 week away. It feels a little impossible, but it is knocking. Yes.
Yeah, which made me think of my to-do list, which actually caused me pause and a little stress. But so attend Capitol Day. And if you're hearing this later, whatever that looks like for you, but hopefully if you're hearing this in the next week, join us at Capitol Day. Join us next year at Capitol Day. Bring people with you. It is one of the other ways to build relationships with your own legislators. It's not always easy because they're in session and you may not get FaceTime with your legislator. You may or you may not. But for them to know that there are hundreds and hundreds of legislators downstairs, it makes a difference. It is impactful. So we have had an unusually brutal winter, I have to say, as someone who does not like snow. Hopefully that will not be a problem for us next week. But whenever it is, attend Capitol Day. Oh, I'm going to throw in a 5th point. Come to conference.
Yes.
Come to conference, hear from legislators, hear our panels. And that is one way to support the IAHE and IAHE action at the same time. And you'll be encouraged, you'll be equipped, and you'll encourage us at the same time. We are a volunteer-driven organization, and we need your support. We need your support because,
Absolutely.
Again, this bill, we're not sure what will happen yet, but we need you behind us. We need to be together as a state. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I just want to highlight those dates super quick. So if you're trying to figure out where IAHE is going to be, where these events are, jump onto our webpage, www.iahe.net. My husband always makes fun of me because there's so many vowels there together. Yes. I always make sure that I enunciate them very clearly. Go to our events section. You'll find Capitol Day. It's on January 3rd. The events kick off at noon, but you're going to want to make sure that you're there between 11:15 and 11:30. There's slated to be almost 700 homeschoolers here in the state there for Capitol Day. So you're not going to want to miss our legislative speakers. So our legislators are coming to speak. And then also Matt Barnes is our main speaker that day. So nobody's going to want to miss that. This year for conference, so conference 2025, it is March 21st and 22nd. We're going to be in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We are so excited to take conference on the road and bring that to some of our friends who've been traveling for years. So we are really excited to be in a new space this year. And of course, we'll travel next year as well. But those are just the events for 2020.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, very helpful. So, okay, everyone, we hope that you will take note of this. If you need to listen again, listen again. If you need to share, listen with your spouse, listen with your support group or your co-op. We went a little longer than normal, but this was an important episode. So thank you for spending the last 40 minutes with us. We really appreciate it, and stay in touch.